The information contained in this video is intended for educational purposes. We are not responsible for any damage to your device resulting from improper disassembly or installation. Proceed at your own risk.
This is Mike from GoCellPhoneRepair.com, and today we're going to remove and replace the screen on an iPhone 6 Plus. Remember, if you need tools, replacement parts, and more information about this repair, check out the video description. We have links down there that can point you in the right direction. So I would recommend that you watch this entire video before you attempt the repair. There are a couple things I do want to point out during the process that you will need to know in order to increase your chances of success, one of them being to use a heat gun in a couple of places where we didn't actually do so in this particular video. And of course, you may get ahead of yourself if you're not careful. So again, it's a pretty short video. I'd recommend you take a look at the whole thing. Fortunately, these screens are finally coming down a little bit in price, so it's becoming affordable to fix them. We'll have a couple of tools we're going to be using today. First of all, we will of course need our proprietary pentalobe driver that you only use on Apple products. There are two screws down at the bottom adjacent to the lightning port, so go ahead and remove those, and from there on out we'll be using a Phillips driver for all of the screws on the inside of the phone. So here we're going to go ahead and switch over to a this is actually a Japanese industrial standard 000. Normally you can use a Phillips 000 driver as long as the tip is not too tall. Going into the bottom of the phone, you can take a plastic tool. You don't even need any kind of special opener, just a thin plastic tool, and you can get between the rear case and the display assembly down here at the bottom. Don't have to worry about that fingerprint scanner cable running behind the home button like we used to on the 5S, and we'll just kind of separate the display from the casing up along the sides. Remember, we do have cables at the top. You don't have to pry in very deep to get this thing to open up, and once you open the bottom, you can kind of pull it downwards and disengage those clips on the top that go underneath the edge, and that'll give you a little bit of room to move the screen around. And when you open it up, you don't want it to be right up against the camera or the top edge, so that's why we kind of pull it down in the beginning. And of course, you want to get something to stabilize this. You don't want to just let it flop open, because if you do, you'll be putting stress on those cables that are still attached to the logic board. So find something that's going to be stable and just kind of hold this thing upright while we go ahead and disconnect the cables and the battery. So we have a series of screws up here that are installed in this cover plate. You want to make sure that you keep all of these screws in the correct position when you put them in. They can be different lengths, and you can actually damage your phone if you get them mixed up. So lay these out in order so that you'll have no doubt about where they go back inside of the phone. Once these screws are removed, this cover plate can pretty much just be lifted up out of the phone. And be careful you don't snag anything on the way out there. Before we disconnect any of these cables though, we want to unplug the battery. It's always a good idea not to have any power flowing through the device, and you can actually do this step before you even take those screws out if you want to. We have two screws down here on another cover plate, and this is going to give us access to the battery terminal so that we can go ahead and unplug it. Once you get that panel removed, just take a soft pry tool. I'd recommend not really using a screwdriver here unless you're very steady-handed. It's highly recommended that you use something non-conductive like a pry tool such as this. Those little crowbars work pretty well too, and you just kind of lift that connector directly off the board, and once that's unplugged, we'll be safe and not have to worry about anything shorting out on the inside of the phone. Now we'll move back up to these cables towards the top end, and you're going to have a series of them that will need to be disconnected. A couple of them are actually hidden from view right now, and unfortunately our tech did not, kind of had his hand in the way, so you'll have to take my word for it, and you'll see them when you peel these back. There are a couple of additional cables here that he's unplugging that are directly beneath these ones on the top. So once you make sure that you have disconnected all of those cables, you'll be able to lift the display assembly away from the phone. So we'll go ahead and just move the housing over and set that aside, and we can concentrate on moving the hardware from this display over to the new one. Typically when you buy a new iPhone 6 Plus display, it's not going to come with a lot of the components that we have here, the fingerprint scanner, the earpiece, front-facing camera, and so on. We have several actually two cover plates here that we're going to remove, and then the back plate behind the LCD, series of screws that need to be removed. And keep in mind, you must transfer your fingerprint scanner from your screen to your new one because it is matched to your phone and you cannot replace that component. This is another thing that we have to be very careful about. If you damage the fingerprint scanner on this phone, it will not work and it cannot be replaced. So do exercise caution. Take your time and make sure that you have thoroughly examined the parts before you remove them and know what you're getting into. You can see the front-facing camera kind of folds over to the side and you'll be able to remove the earpiece speaker at that point. And then on the sides here, we've actually got 3 screws that are going to come out, and they're slightly offset from the opposing side. And then we've got 2 down here at the bottom and one on the left-hand side of that cover plate. Now, before you actually remove the back, you're going to have to go in here and detach a couple of things because remember, we've got a flex cable that runs up there for the fingerprint scanner to the upper end of the phone. So don't just tear this rear panel out yet. We're going to have to deal with some adhesive at the bottom there shortly. This will lift up at the top, but again, it's still connected down on the bottom left-hand side of where the home button was just a second ago. So we've got to get underneath these cables, and I recommend that you use a heat gun to warm this up. If you bring the surface temperature of the adhesive up to about 90-95 degrees, as far as 100, it'll make it a lot easier to peel it away from the housing without doing any damage to the cable. So we're going to go ahead and push the home button through, and we'll set that aside. And then we've got one more cable here that's stuck at the bottom. So again, take your time. You've got to get in between this and the panel, the glass or the plastic without causing any damage. Again, there's a reminder, please use heat during this procedure. We did not in this particular video. We were in a nice warm environment, so we didn't have too much trouble, but you can see he's still kind of having to work at peeling that away from the plastic. So heat will make this 10 times easier. And when you finally get underneath here, you'll be able to kind of peel that away in one piece without tearing through it. And now we've just got a couple more things at the top. Basically, the front-facing camera and proximity sensor are going to need to be transferred to the new display. And if you take a look at where the front-facing camera is, there's a small plastic ring that you would normally remove. You'll see it here in just a second. On the right-hand side there, just underneath where he's prying right now to the right, that round plastic ring, if you don't have one on your replacement screen, you will want to transfer that over to the new one. And that will help keep dust out of your front-facing camera. We did not want to tear this one off of this particular phone since we are going to put it back together. So again, closely examine your new part. If you see anything missing from it that's on the old one, you want to make sure to transfer that over. Otherwise, you may sacrifice some functionality. So there's also going to be a small plastic rectangle in the center of the top end there that you're going to want to move over again if your new part does not come with it. Otherwise, you will not keep your proximity sensor centered and you'll have trouble with the screen shutting off or staying on at the wrong times. So from here, putting the display back together is pretty much the reverse of the disassembly. If you take a look at the cables that plug into the logic board when you go to install this, make sure that any of the rubber pads that are stuck to the back of the old ones get transferred over to the new housing, or rather to the new cables. That will keep them from coming unplugged and prevents the possibility of grounding if something starts rolling around on the inside of the phone. You also want to make sure that when you install the home button that those cables set properly in the areas that they were originally situated in. If not, you will have some problems with your fingerprint scanner. If it doesn't work when you first install it, there's a possibility that something's not lined up correctly, so you might need to pull the phone apart again and make sure that these sit down. You'll see there's some little rings that go around pegs on the front panel there. So make sure that you're lining up and you're getting those pegs through the hole in the cable so that it all stays in the same position it was before. And of course, you do want to make sure that you reattach the cable at the bottom. So from here, we've just got these 3 screws down at the bottom end. And then we'll go ahead and install our front-facing camera proximity sensor. And remember, we've got the earpiece speaker that's going to go in before we put the rear panel on. And you can kind of see how that folds over. And make sure that little piece goes inside of that plastic rectangle. It should be centered. You shouldn't feel anything lumpy underneath there. It should be nice and flush. We'll go ahead and sit the earpiece in position. Fold the cable back over, and then we can put the panel on. These cables can be a little tricky to plug in. You just have to kind of feel around, take your time, don't force them if it feels like they're not lining up properly, and you smash them, you're going to have much more serious problems than a broken screen. So do take note of where these are positioned, and keep in mind it does not take a lot of force to connect them. So if you're having to push really hard, you're probably not lined up straight. If you get the phone put back together and you see vertical and or horizontal lines in the screen, it might be that one of these connectors is not properly seated. So you can always go back, take everything apart and disconnect and then reseat the connectors. This is a very common problem that people run into. So again, don't panic if you see some lines when you plug the screen in. More than likely, these are just not seated properly. And of course, when you plug in your battery, make sure that you do replace the retaining panel on the back. And also be sure to latch the upper end of the phone inside of the case. If you don't, you'll not be able to close it. And you see there's 3 tabs there again that go underneath the very upper edge. And take your time, don't put any pressure in the middle of the LCD, just kind of work your way down and everything should close up nice and flush all the way around. And then we'll switch back to our pentalobe driver and replace the 2 screws at the bottom of the phone. If you found the video helpful, hit the like button and feel free to share it on the social network platform of your choice. Check out some of my recent repair and product review videos, and visit us on the web at gocellphonerepair.com. Thanks for watching.